You're someone with a vision for your practice, for your side hustle, and for your personal journey. But when it comes to establishing your path on how to get to where you want to be with your practice, things get a little messy. You're also someone who'd prefer to go in person instead of to groups and listening to everyone else's story. To me, it sounds like you could benefit from one-on-one consulting with our experienced practice of the practice consultants. From $5.95 a month and up, you can work with a consultant that will give you more direction and practical tried and tested tips matched to you and your goals. For more information, visit practiceofthepractice.com/apply. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/apply. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1083. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. All last week, we had Level Up Week. So many of you joined us for the 16 live webinars that we did for every phase of private practice. Whether you were in solo practice, starting a group, or growing a group, we had a ton of webinars for you. A bunch of people also joined our communities. We open up our communities twice a year. We have Next Level Practice, which is aimed at solo practitioners. We have Group Practice Launch for those that are jumping into a group practice, and Group Practice Boss for people that have their group practices. Those are open this week and close on Thursday. So you are going to want to make sure that you level up over at practiceofthepractice.com/level up. We are helping you build a thriving practice you absolutely love. And, part of that is talking to interesting people. And every single month, we bring in experts to speak in our communities. Experts like you've been hearing from during this Level Up series in the last week and a half or so. And today is no different. I am so excited to have Chris Dyer with me. Chris is a celebrated keynote speaker with over 15 years of experience specializing in company culture and remote work. As a CEO, his leadership led his companies to be recognized as best workplaces and to be featured in Inc. magazine's fastest growing companies list 5 times. Renowned for his expertise, Inc. magazine named him the #1 leadership speaker on culture. Chris, welcome to the Practice of Practice podcast.
Hey, Joe, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, firstly, congratulations. Being named 5 times as fastest growing companies and #1 leadership speaker on culture, you got to work hard to get that.
I think you do, but my employees had to work even harder. It was really my, staff that did the amazing work, and they made all these things happen. So I was really loved being a part of the ride and being a CEO and having that company. And it was probably one of the best times of my life for sure.
Well, I want to talk about workplace culture, but then later in the show, we'll dive into how to have a good keynote, because I want to pick your brain on that. I have a keynote that's just in a couple of weeks at the Mental Health Marketing Conference, doing the closing keynote. So just selfishly, I want to pick your brain about an awesome keynote, but we'll get there. I want to talk workplace culture first. So we've got mostly therapists. I'd say a third of our audience are solo practitioners. They might have a virtual assistant. They're maybe thinking about adding a clinician. Probably a third of them have small group practices. So, 5 to 10 people working for them. And then the rest are 20 plus employees as part of their business. So for the most part, under 50 employees as a part of their business. What would you say most people do wrong when it comes to workplace culture?
Well, and I might try to pare this down, as you said, to what I've seen inside of the specific world of these practices. Even my own therapist, I helped him with his practice. And seeing what was going on with him. And I think there's this, and this happens in a lot of organizations where you are smaller, where you have, it's you're the one driving this stuff, and you have employees, and there really isn't like an HR person. There isn't like these other leaders. It's you. And I think one of the biggest challenges is like you're trading dollars and time. And so, if you are a therapist and you can book your clients in there, are you going to take an extra hour and then go meet with your team? And are you going to do the stuff that you need to do to really help the organization be healthy? Or does that get kind of put on the, in the back, or is less of a priority, because you could do one more session. You could make that, money for your business if you just did an hour of that instead of an hour with your team, or on business development, or dealing with that maybe problem therapist or whatever, right? So that is a struggle for any business, especially at this level, where you're not dedicating the time. Now, to your specific question of like, what are they doing wrong? Usually they're not being transparent enough. They're not being open and honest about what is working with the business, what's going well, where are we struggling, where do we need help, where am I as the leader like struggling, and I'm really not doing well. We tend to hide this stuff and like, bury it down and not want to tell our employees. We're afraid they'll leave or they won't like it. When it's actually the complete opposite. By sharing with them and being open and honest and transparent about the business, they will help us be more successful.
When I hear that, I think about how I ran mental wellness counseling before I sold it in 2019. And at that time, I had little kids and was pulled in so many different directions. I kind of had the mindset with my business. I want to just show up, do the work, and then I'm not looking for friends. I'm not looking for barbecues on a Saturday with other clinicians. Like, I already have my friends, and I want people to show up, make money, go home, do good work. I missed out on a ton of different things that could have happened in my workplace culture by having that mindset. When people have that mindset, when they kind of say, I'm just giving people a job, they're going to do good clinical work, do good clinical work, go home. What are they missing out on when they're not focusing in on that culture?
Well, they're missing out on improving their practice, on making sure that their clients are ultimately having the best experiences. You know, I would imagine that every practice is different in what they focus on, or what they value, or what the kind of clients they want to have. And if we're not talking about that consistently, and we're not reinforcing what we as the owners of our business think is right, and what we want to focus on and what we want to not focus on, maybe we just need to empower a particular therapist to say, listen, that's not a good client, and you need to let them go. Right? You're having a hard time there. This is causing you a lot of aggravation, or maybe this person isn't paying, or like, sometimes the bosses just need to like have those conversations, be able to empower people to make the right decisions. So if we're missing out on those opportunities to have those conversations, or to provide the wisdom and the direction of to help them decide how they should navigate those decisions in the future, right? Then we're missing out. We're essentially just playing defense all the time. We're constantly responding and reacting to what happens, versus helping them understand how we want them to deal with things in the future, so that we're not in that position all the time.
Mm. Now, when you were CEO, were there things that you saw that you're like, this needs some changing in the culture? And then if so, what were they, and how did you implement change?
Well, I'm a big believer that you need to really address change in two ways. First, we want to set goals, and we want to try to do change in very small incremental pieces. And I'm sure that this makes perfect sense to anybody out there that's in the world of therapy. I mean, we don't go from, you know, geez, I'm a people pleaser, a codependent people pleaser, to suddenly being totally fine in one session. Right? This is a lot of work that happens over a long period of time. And so change happens incrementally. But when we set a good goal of, hey, can we get 1% better? How do we help the practice get 1% better each month or each week, or whatever that time frame is? That's a really great way for people to understand and not feel overwhelmed by it. That we're not saying we need to double our business in a month. That's just like, oh my gosh, how do we do that? That's so overwhelming. The second part of that, though, is if you're going to change and you're going to get better, I have always seen that in a company structure, we're talking about culture, we're talking about growing a business, we want to attack the thing that's going to help us get the most benefit first. And I notice that people want to go and attack the small little thing, because then it's like, well, we got to win, and it was easy to fix that little thing. But it doesn't really get people inspired and excited to keep going with that change. It was like, well, we did all this work and we got this tiny little win. Is that really what I want to do? Or if like, geez, we could go and really attack this big thing, and it might take us a long time to actually get there, when we do, wow, does that change really mean something? And now, what else can we do? What else? I'm getting excited about how we can make this practice better. So, again, incremental change, but focus on the big stuff first.
Yeah. Yeah. So with different businesses that you've worked with that are in the healthcare, mental health care space,
Yeah.
what are some things that you've seen that are effective in building that culture?
Sure. So I talked about transparency, and what I mean by that is, can we share our goals? Like, do people know what the company's goals are? Do we all know with each other's individual goals are? I mean, with a group of 20 people or 10 people in your office, like everyone should know everyone's goals for the year. And if we're not being transparent, we don't understand that. Like, if I'm you and I are in the same practice, Joe, and like I know your goal is to, like, I don't know, get 10 more clients this year, I'm going to maybe be able to help you with that. Like, I may
Mm,
suddenly find myself full and I'm like, well, I could refer someone over to you. I know you're trying to get up to 10. I can help you with your goals. And in a way that doesn't necessarily hurt me. But if I didn't know that was your goal, right? Or I didn't know it was your goal to get some certification this year, and maybe I could cover some things for you so you could go into that class and get a certification. Like, that's how we help each other get better, by being open and transparent about what we're actually trying to do and what does success look like. Then we can go back and celebrate what's working, talking about what's working, and focusing on that first, right? Celebrating those wins, celebrating what's working, and then going and saying, now what can we get better at? Versus walking around with this badge of, I'm a problem solver. I like to solve problems, which means you're inherently looking for all the negative stuff all the time. And we know that stuff exists, but like, let's talk about what's working first. Your employees will be so much happier if you're like, hey, who's killing it? Who's doing awesome? Who do we need to high five right now? Where are we doing great? Okay, and now where can we try to get better as the secondary?
mm. Now, I imagine there's a bit of a challenge when you're giving keynotes to a bunch of different types of audiences. Kind of one of the rules I've heard about keynotes is that you kind of want to have your standard keynote and you're not making it custom for every audience. So, how do you kind of marry the diversity of the organizations you speak to or you train with that idea of like not recreating the wheel every time? Like, what are some of those kind of standard things that you bring into a keynote that are true kind of across the board? Like you mentioned, transparency. Are there other things like that that are universally applicable to businesses?
Well, I mean, as someone who has deeply studied, researched, and worked on culture for 20 plus years, this has been my focus. That does come through, right, in every uh, keynote that I give. My keynotes focus on culture. I have some keynotes that focus on the future of work, like what's coming, what do we need to be thinking about in our businesses. And that's AI and all kinds of other things, and generational changes. I talk about mastering tough conversations. How do we have those candid, really tough conversations with people to help them grow and get better, or maybe dealing with difficult people. Um, and so those are things that I'm talking about all the time. Now, I will say, what often in a conference setting, people are asking, looking at a list of my keynotes and saying, "I want you to talk about that," and I'm going to come and deliver maybe something that's similar to other conferences when I've talked about that, and I do customize it a bit based on the audience, right? Obviously, I'm going to go talk to a group of like who might be listening today. I might say things a little bit differently than I would if I was going to go talk to a room full of CPAs and CFOs. So there might be some changes there. But I will say, when I go in and talk to individual companies, when or big organizations bring me in to deliver keynotes to help them make changes in their company, I am highly customizing that. I'm spending deep time to make sure that every slide is relevant to that company and what they're trying to work on. And so there is a big difference there on whether you customize or not. And to be fair, what they're paying me is a lot different usually, so that plays a factor too, right? Where they're asking me to come in and deliver a very specific thing and paying a very specific price. That has a very different outcome.
That makes sense. I am so excited about Alma. When I had my private practice, I struggled building my caseload, attracting the right clients, managing the business side. And honestly, one of the reasons I didn't take insurance was it was so difficult to navigate. So many of my consulting clients deal with these problems as well, and Alma supports clinicians in building rewarding private practices with simplified insurance credentialing in under 45 days, enhanced reimbursement rates, and guaranteed 2-week payback. Plus, a free profile in their searchable, filterable directory, making it easy for clients who are the right fit for your practice to find you. Learn more about how Alma could support your private practice at helloalma.com/Joe. That's hello, ALMA.com/Joe to learn more. Now, as we think about how people that have deep information, so a lot of these people that are listening have master's degrees, PhDs in a particular mental health area. And I think a lot of them aspire to do more keynotes, to do more speaking. Let's just start with what makes a good keynote in your mind, and then we can kind of dig in past there.
Well, a good keynote should be something that is delivering the information that the audience needs at that moment. And so sometimes they need inspiration. Sometimes they need to laugh. Sometimes they need to learn something. Sometimes they need to. For me, I always am in this position of I'm either here to change how you think or I'm here to change how you feel. And I'm usually trying to get that right with the conference organizers or with the individual company I'm working with is what are we trying to do here? Am I trying to change how they think or change how they feel? Because sometimes they just need to change how they, like with the future of work, a lot of times they just need to change how they feel about all of this change that's happening right now. And we've got to address that before they ever get to how to actually implement and do all this stuff that's here. They got to change their mindset. And sometimes I got to change how they think. And maybe I'm actually going to teach them how to use AI and prompt generating. And maybe I'm going to get into more of the minutia of, in the future of work talk, or I'm going to get into tactical things they can actually do to help their employees be happier. So setting that is really, really important as we go into a keynote to make it effective for the audience. And that, to me, that's the most important thing. Is it effective for the audience?
Mm. And how do you use like story and research within your presentations? Like, is there a way that you think about those two elements?
Almost every slide that I give is a story. I mean, I'm just telling one story after another. I mean, you might as well call me a storyteller more than a keynote speaker. I mean, that's essentially what I'm doing, is delivering them this content in the package of a story. Sometimes it's a personal story. Sometimes it's, about something I went through or experience with an employee or in a company that I own. And sometimes I'm telling somebody else's story. That's okay too. But to be able to articulate and deliver that point and help them understand the context, I find that to be far more effective than standing up there, putting up 6 bullet points and saying, to be an effective communicator, you must do 1, 2, 3, 4. Instead, I could tell a story about how I made this shift and what was the outcome for that employee. That always feels far more engaging, and the audience seems to appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. What do you think makes a good story?
Well, a good story. I mean, there's a lot here. I mean, a good story can make you laugh. A good story can make you cry. Right? Can change that. Again, it's going to change how you think or change how you feel. I think that makes a good story. Now, there are some patterns to stories. There are some tactics out there. If anyone's looking for some real help there, I love, there's a little flashcard thing called Storyteller Tactics you can buy out there. And they've got every bit and thing of kind of help people. There's, using universal stories and different concepts. You can talk about like the 3 great conflicts. You can talk about good versus evil. But again, you need to have some kind of framing, some kind of structure to this story. So story tells you enough about what it is that you went through and delivers that outcome or that information that the person needs. I don't know if you've ever heard someone tell a good story versus someone who tells a bad story. And I would say the bad story is like, they start talking and they're like, well, last week I was talking to an employee. Well, this employee's name was Rob, and Rob is from South Dakota. And like they start getting into like such small details that don't matter to the story. Like we need enough
Mm,
detail to set the stage, but not so much detail we get lost in it. And we need to, and that, so good story kind of walks that line, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah. Now, when you do well as a CEO and you get, named like top keynote, like how do you go beyond that? Like are people just reaching out to you at this point to find to bring you in to speak, or is there still some level of marketing yourself? Because I think a lot of our listeners, it's hard to go from I own a counseling practice, I have all this knowledge that mostly is reserved for people that come into my office, but I know deep down that this could be something that the world needs, whether it's parenting or uncoupling or whatever their specialty is. And they're thinking, like, how do I get into the world more? How do I do more keynotes? How do I find that business? Is it once you kind of get known, it just the business comes to you, or would you say that there's some strategy behind it at this point for you?
As a speaker, you are, especially in the beginning, you are always going out there and putting yourself out there. So, when you're starting out, unless you become famous or infamous, you really can't skip a step in this sort of the journey as a speaker. And it doesn't mean you have to do all the steps or go all the way. Sometimes, when I owned my last business, like I could only ever do 15 keynotes a year. Like that was the max I could do. It was the family and running a business. Like I had to cap it. Now I don't have a business. I can do 48, 50 in a year. It's a totally different, thing. Um, so if you want to get out there and you want to talk, first is why, right? Do you just want to share a message? That's cool. Do you want to build your practice? That's another reason. You need to kind of figure out what that is and where does that audience sit. So you can go out and volunteer and deliver keynotes to all kinds of groups that are looking for free speakers all the time. And from there, what typically happens is if you're doing a good job, if you're a good speaker and you have good content, you'll get what's called spin. You'll get asked from those audience members to come to other places to speak. And that's where then you might start getting some money. Maybe they ask you to come to their company and you're going to charge something. But there's this constant, you get some from the people who saw you speak or the people who booked you, and you're getting some from your outreach. And eventually, when you reach a certain point, there are speakers bureaus and agents and things like that that begin booking you as well. But that's a whole journey, right, over many, many, many years that you might travel down.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice. Now, I want to kind of bring this back to culture. So, when you are leveling up your business, you're getting these keynotes, doing things that maybe weren't initially as much a part of being a CEO. Any changes in a business or changes in the time of one of the key people puts different stresses on the team. Um, and we deal with this at Practice the Practice, where as I get invited to do keynotes or different like speaking opportunities, there's just different stress. Things that I used to be able to do pretty easily, I don't have time to do, or it's not a great use of my time. When looking at it through the lens of workplace culture, what do good leaders do as they evolve, change, and level up?
Well, they're constantly learning and they're constantly asking questions and getting curious about, things that are happening. So it's sort of like they're always looking for more information. And we see that pretty consistently by those top leaders and that act that way. They are asking good questions, getting curious, reading books, learning new things. And I think the last thing is that they are also willing to say yes most of the time. I, I challenge a lot of leaders to start thinking about saying yes as their default response to things. Yes, and yes, but. But when an employee comes to you with an idea, yeah, let's talk about it. How can we make that happen? Let's explore that. Let's be curious. Let's want to learn more versus no, we've tried that. No, we're not do that. No, I don't have time. No, not right now, because that becomes really deflating for your people. And suddenly, they have this great idea to expand your business or save you money or I don't know, advertise in some way, and you've consistently said no and kind of pushed them to the side, they're just going to stop coming to you. And they're either going to do poor work for you or not help you grow the business, or they're going to go somewhere else where they do feel heard. And so I think That's a really important part that leaders need to think about.
Yeah, no, I love that. What are things we missed when it comes to workplace culture? I mean, you're such a bank of knowledge. I imagine there's questions I should have asked that I just didn't ask. What did I miss?
The other big thing with culture is that we really have to make sure that we are measuring what matters. So, have we decided what matters? Um, maybe that's client satisfaction. Maybe that's client attrition numbers. Maybe that's, the scores that we get as therapists. Are we even surveying people? Like, we have to decide. Maybe it's that we have good boundaries, like whatever it is that you think is important to your practice and to your business. Have we identified that, and then how are we measuring that? So a lot of times we talk about certain things and we don't measure them, and even worse, we know it's in our head, but we don't tell anybody. We don't measure it at all. But we can't possibly um, understand and make sure that the things that we want to grow and get better are getting better if we're not measuring them and talking about that. So, maybe it's just that you want employees who help other employees, who are willing to do a 5-minute favor, who's willing to jump in and step up, and like, are you measuring that somehow? Maybe you want employees that are positive and say yes, and you know, how do you measure that? Or you want employees that say thank you and or recognize their fellow employee when they do something great. How do you measure that? So that's usually a big thing that is a hole for a lot of organizations, especially smaller organizations that don't think about that, don't have the time, don't have the personnel to do some of that. But it's very, very important.
That's so awesome. Chris, the last question I always ask is, if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
What would I want them to know? Probably that they need to be spending more time on their business instead of in their business. And if they can figure out how to do that, whether it's reserving a few hours a week or, I don't know, a few hours on Sunday night or whenever that thing is, how do they spend a little bit more time on their business to ensure that they are reaching their goals, that their business is working for them? That is what they need to spend a little bit more time doing. And they will have less headaches, less heartache, and probably more money in their pocket if they do that.
So awesome. Chris, if people want to follow you, if they want to hire you to speak, if they want to work with you, follow your work, all those things, where should we send them?
Well, a couple easy resources. First, if you want to text 33777 and you put in my name, Chris, I'm happy to send you a free PDF with some ideas on some different things you can do with your team and make sure you're listening and different meeting types. That's a free resource. Secondly, happy to connect on LinkedIn. You can go to my website, chrisdyer.com, or any social media platform you're on. I'm probably there. I do a ton on TikTok and Instagram, and LinkedIn. Happy to interact with you there.
So awesome. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just love that idea of continuing to learn and grow, and especially the idea of saying yes to your team. So that we're training them to have ideas and to go after things. We've had something at Practice for years where we say proceed until apprehended. So if you have an idea, go after it. Sure, get some of the approvals, but we want to go on the side of innovation rather than signatures and sign-offs. And if it doesn't work, then we'll recalibrate. But you never know where that big new idea is going to be. Like, for example, a few months ago, Josh, who's the person that does all of our bookings for our guests, he had some ideas on how to more strategically look at the types of guests we're bringing on. And I sent him a Slack message earlier today because the people I've been interviewing over the last 5 or 6 interviews, I've just been like, oh my gosh, Josh, you've been doing an amazing job bringing in these really awesome people, like people like Chris that I just got to talk to today. And he's being thoughtful, he's being strategic, and that was his idea to do this. And so that idea of like proceed until apprehended, like give the go ahead to people. You never know how that's going to come to fruition and to help your business grow just in a different way that maybe you never would have thought of. And that's what's the great thing about having a team. Also, we couldn't do this show without our amazing sponsors. Alma is our sponsor for today's show. Alma supports clinicians in building rewarding private practices by simplifying the insurance credentialing process to under 45 days. Also, you get enhanced reimbursement rates and a guaranteed 2-week payback. To me, it's what I wish I had had when I had my private practice. Insurance at that time for me was just too complicated, and I wish I had had Alma at the time. Head on over to helloalma.com/Joe to find out more. Again, that's helloalma, ALMA.com/Joe to learn more. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have an amazing day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.